Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. I'm back, and today I bring you Angron from the World Eaters Legion, finally coming back. Yeah, this video is coming out after the line was announced. Oh yeah, someone asked for a commission of it. I was going to do it anyway, so the stars aligned, and here we are. So I'm going to be painting it like the box art. And of course, I assemble the model up to the point where I get in the way of painting. The wings are separate. The arms are fully assembled except for the shoulder pads. They're assembled. His main body, head, the nails, his legs, tail is all assembled in one. His shoulder pads, groin armor, little details like that. The skull rack trophy that's above his head is separate and such. And of course, his many trophy racks are separate. And yeah, and I prime it all with Bright Touch General Purpose Gray Car Primer. However, apparently, I ran out, and when I went to replace it, I could not find it anywhere in any auto parts store I went to. So I found a close, something that could fit the bill, this Rust-Oleum Black. It's like the closest I could find that works with plastic. And it sprays very strongly. That's one thing I noticed. So part of the model is black, part of it's gray. So, and then here are all the paints that I used throughout this model, and let's get to it. Alright, for first thing we do is Eshin Gray, Pallid Witch Flesh, and White Scar White. We're going to do undercoating. Now, we're going to start with Eshin Gray, and we're going to use an airbrush and spray it from the bottom, which made it a little difficult to adhere to the black, well, to be visible through the black, let's be real. Then Pallid Witch Flesh I sprayed from up above. This was more impactful on the wings, the outside parts of the wings, and as such, yeah, it was easy to do this large model. And White Scar White for the dry brushing. So I didn't really do this in most places. I did this like it's on part of his chest and stuff, his face and stuff, his tail especially. Basically places with a lot of pointy areas that was going to not be hidden by the armor and stuff. His hands, stuff like that, yeah. Alright, with Troll Slayer Orange and Lawman Medium, we'll mix them together to create a wash, and we'll apply this all over the model. In some places I might have to do a second coat because it's a little thin there, but overall apply this on all his skin, essentially. When doing these washes and speed painting like this, you want to go from light to dark, so you want to add the dark later, instead of like starting with the darkest color and adding layers of highlights. So light to dark it is. And now with Dawnstone and Lawman Medium, I am going to paint his, well, the membrane of his wings. This is a very light color, so we're going to start with this. So turning it into a wash, and we apply it all over. Might have to do a second coat in some areas, if it's like, we don't want it to be too white underneath. That's essentially it. And now with Dark Reaper and Lawman Medium, we turn this into a wash and we apply this onto the, I don't know what these are, but it's his cloth that he has, that he wears, and his, it's the gladiator-like stuff that's hanging off his armor, these strips of leather thingy. Also note that for the cords that go into his head, the non-metal ones, the color couldn't adhere too well because I got some of the orange on there and that was too strong to cover over. So for these ones, we're just going to have to paint the Dark Reaper just solid. Alright, with cadmium red and mineral spirits, essentially what I'm going to do is I'm not going to create a wash, I'm actually going to create into a paint. So I'm going to apply enough mineral spirits till it turns into like a paint, easy to apply paint, and we're going to apply this all over his orange skin, except the part of his wings. I'll demonstrate that later. And once we've applied it all, we then wipe it all off. Now doing it as a paint, it really saturates the model and changes it a bit, makes it a very deep red, and so that's kind of what I wanted. And when I wipe it away with a makeup brush, the red really saturates it and clings to the deepest recesses just as well. And then I'll show a photo for comparison between the new red and the old. Then I'm going to add more mineral spirits and turn the red into a wash, a light wash, and apply it all over the skin, and then do again a fine wiping on the most raised areas and stuff and such to show highlights and progression of light to dark. Alright, and now with magenta and mineral spirits to dilute it, we turn it into a paint, and we're going to apply this to the other portions of the wings that we didn't paint before, like the parts between the membranes, and I don't know how to describe it, but just watch the screen. Now, I did the usual thing of apply the paint, then I wipe it off with a makeup sponge, but I didn't get footage of the wiping part. And then I took the magenta and turned it into a thin wash, and then reapplied it everywhere, and then did a final thin wipe on that in some places as well. And that was it for that. And then we took cadmium red and mixed it with magenta and made a reddish purple, sort of 1-to-1-ish, and I turned this into a wash, and I applied this all over the skin again, the red parts of the skin. And I left it just as is, and it created some more depth and shadow, and flowed well. Alright then, with lamp black, I'm going to create a paint out of this with mineral spirits and apply it all over the membrane. Now, I did do one mistake. I should have done this before I painted the purple, because when I wiped away, some of the wiping got onto the talons or whatever those things are between the membrane and changed its color to a half between purple and black. So, not the best, but the order, I should have done the membrane first. And then after I applied this everywhere, I then made it into a wash and then applied it to the cords that are coming out of him, the pieces of cloth, the few pieces he has to add shadow, and then I wiped the excess away off that on their most raised areas and stuff. Alright, with Blood Angels Red, Magos Purple, and Lamian Medium, we're going to fix some stuff. So after all that stuff with the oil paints and everything, the colors just weren't strong enough. His skin was not red enough, and the purple parts were not purple enough. Well, that's kind of because I screwed up with the black. So with very diluted Blood Angels Red mixed with Lamian Medium, a lot of Lamian Medium to dilute it, we applied this all over his skin, his red skin, to, well, redden it further. You can see everything underneath, the subtlety of the veins and everything else and all the color and stuff, that's fine. But it's now like a shade redder. And with Magos Purple Pure, because this is a very diluted color, I applied this onto the purple parts of his wings, essentially. I had to do around 2 coats to make up for it, and added some color back to him. Alright, with Troll Slayer Orange and Lamian Medium, we're going to use it to dilute it, turn this sort of into a wash-ish. Not really. It's going to dilute it a bit, so it's see-through. So we're going to use this as a highlight, and we're going to paint highlights on, well, the most raised areas, on parts of his flesh and stuff, from blotches to lines here and there, on edges of stuff, or on flat planes of stuff, or places where there's a curvature, essentially, where light may hit. Apply a layer of this, and it's thin enough that it will change the tone color of the area, but it won't be too heavily noticeable. I'm just doing a lot of subtle color stuff, and it pays off in the end. Alright, with Abaddon Black, Dawnstone, and Grayseer, we're going to paint the horns and nails. He has a bunch. He also has some on his hands, his fingernails. So we're going to paint them all with Abaddon Black as a base. Then we're going to do is we're going to take a mix of like 2 parts Abaddon Black and 1 part Dawnstone, and we're going to apply this, actually no, 1-to-1 Abaddon Black and Dawnstone, and apply this like 2/3 of the way up of each horn and such. Then we're going to go with like 1 part Abaddon Black, 2 parts Dawnstone, and on the last third and towards the, and yeah, and that's pretty much what we do. And then with pure Dawnstone, we're going to paint lines along the side and front and back, like north, south, east, west on each of these nails. They essentially, it can accommodate that. There's a sharp line in the middle of each of them and on the top and bottom. And then when we get towards the tip, we're going to mix a little bit of Dawnstone with Grayseer, sort of 1-to-1-ish, and paint the last half of these lines with it. Last half to 2/3. It depends. Just what looks and feels right. And then the very tip, we're going to put a little bit of Grayseer, the bright one, as like a eye-catching dot. Alright, with Doombull Brown, Agrax Earthshade, and Mournfang Brown, we're going to paint his, his armor's held by these leather straps, like on his legs and stuff, and some of his arms. So we're going to start with a base layer of Doombull Brown all over this leather. Then we're going to apply Agrax Earthshade thickly on it to create the shadows. Then we're going to re-highlight pretty much 90% of everything with Doombull Brown. Then we're going to go and do a simple layer of Mournfang Brown on it, a sort of a 1-to-1-ish of Mournfang and Doombull, but that was a little too weak, and then I just do a pure Mournfang Brown on the most raised edges and such and such. Alright, with Corvus Black, Dawnstone, and Grey Seer again, we're going to... how do I put it? He has like these... like stubbles on his face. So we're going to take Corvus Black and we're going to water it down a lot, and we're going to apply layers and layers of it. And a layer will go into like this cheekbone or skin fold to add shadow. And we're going to do very thin layers, and we're going to apply them again and again to darken these. And so that they transition better. It's not like a solid nail where there's a start and end. We're going to slowly transition it over these thin washes. Then we're going to go with Dawnstone and apply a few of these until it catches the eye and transitions from the Corvus Black to the Dawnstone. This takes a little bit of practice to get this thing right, this water-based transitions. And then a drop of Grey Seer on the tips to catch the light. Moving on to his teeth. Which is also a mistake. I should have done the inside of his mouth first, then his tongue, then his teeth. So this order is in reverse, and it makes it very difficult to complete. So basically his teeth already have the Corvus Black from the previous step just all over it, just because. And then with Mournfang Brown, I just paint a thin line covering like 80 to 90% of each of his teeth. And then a straight solid line of Grey Seer going straight down top to bottom from the most front of the center of each tooth. And that's it. And it creates these really sharp looking teeth. Alright, with XV88 and Abaddon Black, I'm going to paint his eyes. They're a yellow, but not so yellow, so XV88 fits. So I'm going to thin it down with water so it flows well, not too well, and then gets on and fills his eyes. Then with Abaddon Black and a fine brush, I'm going to try to paint like a slit down for his eye, but it just doesn't work. So I go back to the tried and tested 0.25mm micro pen and just paint his iris there, and it works. Alright, another mistake. I should have done the inside of the mouth, but I'm doing the tongue. So Emperor's Children, Magos Purple, and Blood Angels Red. Very diluted, by the way. We're going to paint his tongue. So we're going to start with the base layer of Emperor's Children. Then we're going to apply pure Magos to, purple the tongue. Then we're going to re-highlight his entire tongue. Basically, two straight lines, the tops of the tongue meeting in the center, and then lines coming from that along the sides. Then with a very diluted Blood Angels Red, we're going to apply that all over there to redden his tongue. Then we're going to re-highlight again. And yeah, and just go back and forth till you have what you think is satisfactory. Alright, with Corvus Black, Dawnstone, and Grey Seer, we're going to paint his sword. This was a bit of trial and error. So the first try was basically paint the whole thing Corvus Black, then take Dawnstone really watered down to apply multiple layers of this to transition. It did not work out too well. I should have done a mix of Corvus Black, Dawnstone, and built up the brightness so that it'd be a smoother transition. Then I did Dawnstone purely on the edges, and then Grey Seer to highlight the edges in the middle of the sword and the edges. And it was too bright, too powerful. I then tried to fix it by taking Nuln Oil and mixing with Lamian Medium so that it would flow better, and then I applied a bunch of layers on it to sort of darken it and let the shadows naturally build with the Nuln Oil and stuff. In the end, it just looked terrible. So I was like, screw this, alright, I'm going to take the easier route, airbrush. So I repainted everything with Corvus Black as a flat base, then I took the airbrush with Dawnstone, and then I sprayed it on the center parts. The box has the basic image where it gets brighter and stuff, and so there's a much softer transition of color. Then when that's done, I highlighted the whole thing with Dawnstone purely, and then instead of pure Grey Seer, I then mixed in a little bit of Grey Seer with Dawnstone to do the fine highlights on the center top parts of the blade and the tips and edges of the blade. And voila, it looked much better. Alright, with Uriel Yellow and Evil Sun Scarlet, we're going to paint the inside of the sword. So we're going to take Evil Sun Scarlet basically, and I'm going to dry brush the whole area to make it look like there's a little bit of a glow in it, deeply. Then I'm going to take Uriel Yellow, water it down so it flows very well, and fill in the entirety of the sword. Then I'm going to go back with Evil Sun Scarlet once it dries, and then apply it to certain places to make it a stronger red in areas. And that's what I did, but the customer responded, this is actually a commission, and wanted to dull it a bit, so I put in, I'm not showing it here, but a Lysander Yellow contrast paint into it to make the transition between the very bright yellow and red different, and also asked to add gloss wash onto it for some reason. But yeah, but this is what it looks like when I envisioned it. Alright, now with Thondia Brown, Dawnstone, Agrax Earthshade, and Gracier, we're going to paint the preliminary versions of the base. So I don't really go over the bases that much, somewhat. So essentially this is just, he comes with like a stone to stand on, of course, a pile of extra skulls, and so I threw on putty, then threw snow flock on, solidified that on, threw sand flock on, solidified that on. And so Thondia Brown through the airbrush just to get in every nook and cranny everywhere, then dry brush the entire thing with Dawnstone, add Agrax Earthshade to get into the recesses and add some extra depth and shadow here and there, then redo everything with Dawnstone again, and then a lighter dry brush with Dawnstone, and then a very light dry brush with Gracier in some areas and such. And now with Ushabti Bone, Skeleton Horde Contrast, Lamian Medium to help, and Screaming Skull, we're going to paint the skulls. And there are a lot of them. He has them all over his base, he has them on one necklace, 2 waistbands, and he has them on his armor, and he has them on his wings. So there's a lot to go by. So basically, we paint everything with Ushabti Bone as a solid base color. Then paint everything with Skeleton Horde Contrast, giving a little bit of Lamian Medium to make it flow better. If you just do pure Skeleton Horde, there's like this weird marbling effect that happens. If you want that, that's fine, but for this, I want something even and more controllable and predictable. And so a little bit of Lamian Medium helps it flow better. Apply it everywhere, maybe 2 coats if needed. Then go back, do a quick highlight with Ushabti Bone on the more raised areas and stuff, overbrushing for most of it, simple, and then fine highlight of Screaming Skull. Basically, paint the eye sockets, the nose socket, the high cheekbones, and 2 lines along the top of each skull, right and left, and maybe a few lines in between connecting the 2. And that's pretty much all the Screaming Skull highlight is, because there are a lot of skulls. There's also orc skulls by the looks of it, and some other skulls I'm not familiar with. Alright, with Doombull Brown, Agrax Earthshade, and XV88, we're going to paint his hooves. So we can start out with a layer of Doombull Brown. Then we're going to apply Agrax Earthshade. Then we're going to apply Doombull Brown again, highlighting probably 80 to 90% of the hooves, painting straight lines. Then we're going to mix a little bit of XV88 into the Doombull and re-highlight everything but thinner lines. And then we're going to do the same thing again with more XV88 and Doombull Brown and thinner highlights. And we keep doing this until we're satisfied, essentially. Alright, with AK Interactive Ultra Matte Varnish, we're going to do this with an airbrush and we're going to spray everything. This is a sealant, it somewhat protects. I don't know, I've never actually tested how well this protects. But essentially it also saturates the colors, evens them out, and also brings out it makes things prettier, interestingly, especially the wing membranes. That was a big deal. It really made those colors pop. Alright, with fulgurite, copper, castellan bronze, and I don't know, good luck pronouncing that. Not the last one yet. So basically I took the first two. Never actually look at these names. So these are new paints I picked up for this model. So the fulgurite copper is basically what I did was I started with the medium color. So you know, like you build up layers, go from dark to light to highlight. With something like this, no. I do the medium color, I paint in the shadow, and then I'll paint in the highlight later. And so I apply everything with fulgurite copper, and then I take the castellax bronze and I apply it into all the shadows. If there's like something jutting out, like I paint lines of this to its right and left, somewhat hard highlights. And yeah, but at this point I realized that I actually did a little test of that Sycorax bronze as a highlight, and it was barely noticeable. So I had to fix things. Now with Lamian Medium and Seraph Sepia, we apply a little bit of Lamian Medium into this in order to make it flow better. Seraph Sepia is sort of a light brown bronzish. It's not Agrax or shit. I was thinking of Agrax, but that's a little too strong, so I went with this. It's a little softer brown. And then I apply this all over the bronze, and it helps transition color to the shadows better and adds darkens everything with a bit of color, and it makes the highlight much more visible. And now with the fulgurite copper and Sycorax bronze, we're going to do highlighting. So the fulgurite copper, it was the medium tone. I'm going to reapply this again on the large flat planes that are near the light since the color was darkened and everywhere else, reapply this helps build up some color transition. It's very subtle and also adds some shininess here and there. And then the Sycorax bronze, I applied it on all the edges, and I like feather it a little bit into it so that there's sort of a transition period. It's not a sharp line. It's a sharp line and some paint spilling over into other places, and this light in some areas. It's very subtle. It allows for a subtle transition. So, I mean, I had the color there. It's noticeable. Its effect is noticeable on a hard highlight or next to one, but this is a slow color transition and highlight. And with Sycorax bronze and Duralum, which is a very bright silver that is very good. And so basically I mix them together 1-to-1-ish as best I can, and then I I then just highlight all the edges, fine thin highlights on all the edges and raised areas and such as a final highlight to be the focal point of light, essentially. Alright, with Abaddon Black, Exhaust Manifold, and Duraluminum. It's basically a dark metal and a silver bright metal, but the dark metal I have isn't dark enough, so I mix Abaddon Black with it to make it a black metal. And I apply it on all the chains. Some of his armor has teeth, so I apply it there as a base, as a starter? I don't know, as a base coat, yeah. I apply it onto his axe, the metal parts of his axe and such, and the nails in his brain. Then I take the pure exhaust manifold and overbrush, sort of dry brush it onto the nails in his head, the cords, to pick out the details and stuff. And I also do this dry brushing stuff onto the shaft of his axe, and as well as the chains and stuff. And then finally, Duraluminum, I apply a small brushing highlight on the raised areas of the chains and stuff like that, the axe on the edges, and a little feathering here and there on between the from the edges outwards and stuff like that, and just building up highlights and small stuff like here on the silver. Now with Cabalite Green and Lamian Medium, I turn it into a thin wash, very thin wash, and then I apply this onto the worlds that he has, because they're brass-like or copper or rottings. I don't know what it is. Greening them. However, it was very thin, so I had to apply around 2 layers of it. Alright, so before I assemble it, I wanted to point out this. This is that legendary skull that everyone was talking about that is clearly Yarick or stuff. And I hate to break it to you, but this is not Yarick. I took a close look at it, so he has tons of skulls of different sizes. This isn't Astartes' skull. If you look to the left, or no, to his right, your left, his right, those skulls are regular human skulls. His skull is much larger. The skull above him is corrupted in some kind. But his skull, if you look to his above his right eye, those are service studs that only Space Marines have. This isn't Yarick. This is an Astartes captain. And so, before I painted those, because I didn't want to like make it hard to see, so I'm going to paint those now, but you won't see that. But I just wanted to point out that that is not Yarick. Before I assembled him, I wanted to show off the finality of the base. Some extra snow was added, some dark brown was applied for dried blood, and red stuff for wet blood. The 2 helmets was Imperial Fists, and I wanted to go with like a Soul Drinker head, just just helmets that were very visibly different. And so this is the final version of the base. And then I go to assembly. Few notes: the belt buckle he has and the waist thing. Was very difficult to get in. I had to shave some of the plastic down in order to get it in, and the skull trophies that he wears around his waist, I had to file down the armor piece that they're attached to in order to plug it in and fill it in. Yeah, so that took a bit of trial and error to get in, but the rest was very simple. And then after assembly and after all that stuff was done, I also, whatchamacallit, I then went back, touched up a few things, applied some more AK Interactive Ultra Matte Varnish on places where super glue was visible to dull them down so they wouldn't shine. And also I did a quick camera viewing of what the whole model looks like without armor, because you can build him without using any of his armor plates. He has fully molded stomach, abs, arms and stuff, and that'll be invisible now. So yeah, and then I continue on to full assembly. And done. He was very easy to paint. Going on the background, you see the before armor, and then after armor, and then the pics. So he was actually very easy to paint, and there's some very odd, unusual things about the box. So I look at the box art, and the model, his wings and stuff, it's pretty plain. It's like the painter who painted the official box art kind of ignored a lot of the details that were on his wings. Kind of strange. It's noteworthy that there are so many details on here. Like, if you look at Mortorian's box art, like every square inch of that is filled with stuff, but this, they glossed over his wings on the box art, which was interesting to see so much detail hidden in there. Then after that, yeah, it was actually very easy and straightforward to paint. I mean, I made some mistakes. Painting red, I've always had issues with for some reason. It's always a very strong pigmented color, far more than I would expect. But a few mistakes here and there, but they were easy to fix. Overall, he was very fast and easy to paint. It took me so long because partially goofing off, partially I don't have that much time to paint the past couple weeks. Just life happens. But yeah, his base was interesting and fun to get to. His model is interesting, but it's actually very simple and plain compared to his brother Magnus. Very interesting model. Pretty fun. It's a little hard to hold. Actually, I noticed that after assembling it, it's hard to move him around. It's like tabletop-wise, you're going to have to be careful. You're going to have to grab him by the wings. Luckily, they're pretty solid. But, man, yeah. He's actually pretty simple compared to Magnus. And I'm going to assume Mortorian. I haven't painted Mortorian, but he's going to be simpler. So, he's actually pretty simple. He's actually kind of small compared to Magnus. Actually, looking at him, if he would stand completely up, Magnus is like maybe a fourth or maybe a third taller than him. Interesting. But yeah, apart from that, he is done. Of course, because this is a commission, this is not the full final product. The probable final product you're never going to see because there's going to be a bunch of small, minute changes here and there. I'm getting to them. I'm getting emails about small changes here and there as I record this, but whatever. It was a fun, interesting model. It's good to have a seller in the pocket all the way, and yeah. So like the video if you like the video, comment if you want to comment, share if you want to share it. or point out anything you may have noticed, or trying to rebut me that is not Yorick. And yeah, and see you who knows when. Bye.